My name is OP, and I have a remarkable pair of testicles. Written by N.S. Lewis, narrated by Brandon Dayton. I once held in my hands an object discovered in Kosovo that, by all appearances, was an ancient ocarina, carved from some sort of bone. However, when you blew into it, you were not met with musical notes. Rather, the instrument produced streams of color, pouring out of the finger holes and rising briefly into the air, entwining with each other in all sorts of complex patterns, and combining to make new, stunningly vivid colors, which finally vanished back into the ether. All manner of things have happened, or are happening now, on this planet, that we do not understand, or are even vaguely aware of. Occasionally, an artifact hinting at such untold and mysterious forces or events is uncovered, mostly by sheer happenstance. My name is Oliver Percy, OP for short, and I hold commerce in such rare items. My latest acquisitions are the most incredible I've come across yet, as well as the most dangerous. Whoever holds them holds unfathomable power, and even as I type this, nefarious forces creep in the night, seeking to steal them away. Should those forces ever succeed, I fear that our world will become yet another forgotten relic. The testicles fell into my lap, so to speak. I have code running at all hours, crawling the internet in search of certain phrases contained in news articles, blogs, forum posts, and so forth that might indicate the existence of an uncanny item. Any hits trigger a logistic regression which helps determine the likelihood that the source in question is in fact discussing an object of rare properties. If the log odds are high enough and statistically significant, I receive an alert prompting me to look at the source with my own eyes. Most of the time, such a method of discovery turns up nothing interesting. There are exceptions, though. And one day, around 3 months ago, I came across the following post in the off-topic channel of a small forum centered around adhering to the so-called paleo diet. So I finally got the estate sorted after like a year of dealing with red tape bullshit and racking up ridiculous lawyer bills. As it turns out, my father wasn't as rich as he let on, which is fine, whatever, but he did leave me something weird. I'm hoping somebody here knows what the fuck it is. I mean, what they are. There are two of them. Picture it. There I am, standing in the bank vault, ready to finally pop open the safety deposit box, expecting a big wad of cash or something like that, and all I get are these two things. Here, inserted into the text, was a photograph of the two severed testes, which I did not initially recognize as such, shorn of the scrotum, looking like misshapen fleshy eggs. What are they? Does anybody know? I took them to a jeweler thinking they were some kind of precious stones, even though they feel a little, I don't know, rubbery. The jeweler said he hadn't seen anything like them before, and doubted that they were worth anything. But if they aren't worth anything, why did my old man have them in a safety deposit box? Can anybody help me out here? Thanks, guys. Somebody a few comments into the reply thread had an answer. Dude, those are balls. Like, balls. The things below your dick. Upon reading that remark, and acknowledging it instantly as the truth, I was prepared to close out the browser and go about some other business. However, a lingering sense of curiosity kept me reading on. After all, why indeed would this person's father bequeath him two testicles, held secure in a bank vault no less? Other commenters wondered the same thing. One suggested that the poster's father was trolling him even after death, sending him a message to man up and figure out shit on his own. Another proposed the theory that the father had murdered someone, and the testicles served as a posthumous confession. A third, your dad loved balls. It's as simple as that. Just as I was again losing interest, I saw that the owner of the testicles himself had made another post. This is nuts. So I got sick of looking at these fucking balls. It really was like my father was mocking me, and I decided to just toss them into the trash. The thing is, I couldn't. I just stood there like an idiot, holding these ridiculous balls, one in each hand, and I physically could not throw them away. I wanted to, like my mind was screaming at me, get rid of them! And then, I swear to God, they started to get warm in my hands, and I felt weird all up my arms, tingly. and then I felt really strong, like I could deadlift a cow or some crazy shit. Look, I know it sounds insane, but I think there's something going on with these balls. That's why my dad had them locked away. Beyond that, I don't know. What do you guys think? The responses to this were split between people who thought that he was joking and those wondering if he weren't taking some sort of drug to cope with the loss of his father. But I had a different perspective, and there was enough in the story to convince me that those testicles likely had special properties. I created an account on the forum and sent the owner of the items a private message, briefly explaining what I did for a living and how I was interested in inspecting the testicles for myself. If they appeared authentic, I assured him that I was prepared to make an offer to purchase them that I was certain would find him amenable. He responded almost immediately, "Please come get these things, if you're not yanking my chain. I hate them, and I want them out of my life." And so, arrangements were made. The young man's name was Flint, and when I arrived at his apartment, he did not look well. He greeted me at the open doorway, dressed in a white shirt with stains down the front and a pair of athletic shorts. His hair was a tangled mess, and his sunken eyes looked as though they hadn't known rest in several days. "Hey man, OP, right?" "That's me. May I come in?" Yeah, come in. I didn't think you'd actually show, but these balls, they're the real deal. You know that somehow." "It's possible," I said, stepping around a litter of disposable dishes and empty beer bottles. "I've certainly seen stranger things." "Yeah, me too. Great show. What, are these things from the Upside Down or something?" Flint lit a cigarette and started pacing around in a circle. "I thought that was all fake, though." He waved a hand in the air, leaving an arc of smoke in its trail. "What, do you work for the government or something, man?" I gave a good-natured laugh, trying to put the troubled man at ease. "Private sector. As I say, I deal in rare artifacts. Buying, selling, studying. Shall we take a look at the items in question?" Flint squinted and scrutinized me for a painfully long time, until something seemed to click in his head, and he appeared to relax, somewhat. "Sure thing, man, sure. Have a look." He pointed into the kitchen. "In there. Cabinet above the stove, wrapped up in tinfoil. Have a look. I'm not getting near them again. I tell you that as a fact, dude." I nodded and made my way into the kitchen, quite on edge myself. I was either dealing with a potential lunatic, or the testicles had the ability to turn you into a lunatic. I had to be very careful. My pocket knife might provide me some protection against the former possibility, if for some reason Flint attempted to attack me, but against the possibility of madness, I had no defense. Is it worth it? I wondered as I reached up to the cabinet. Should I just turn around and go back home? My hand rested on the knob a moment as I considered, and in the end, the same compulsion that got me into my profession in the first place won out. A thirst to discover the unknown. I swung the cabinet door open and spotted the packet of aluminum foil inside. When I touched it, I felt a slight charge of electricity, and knew at once that I was dealing with something remarkable. "Careful with that shit," cautioned Flint, as I set the packet down on the Formica countertop. Of course," I said, distracted with the excitement of peeling back the thin metal wrapping. Then, there they were before me. 2 severed testicles. Looking like nothing more or less than that. I picked them up and held each one in my palms. A rush of warmth ran up my arms. "You feel that, right?" said Flint. He's weak, I thought. Lives alone. I could slit his throat and walk away free and clear. I fought against the sudden urge to murder, set the testicles back in the foil, and took a deep breath. "Did you feel it?" Flint asked again. I looked warily down at the objects. I did. It had been a surge of power. A terrible surge of power. And? Can you tell me a little more? You inherited them from your father. Do you have any idea where he might have acquired them from? Flint lit another cigarette from the end of the one that he was still smoking. "Nope. My father was a corporate lawyer, a lobbyist over in D.C., making sure oil companies can do whatever the fuck they want, and that the fat cats don't have to pay too much in taxes. I have no fucking clue how he ended up with these magical nuts or whatever the hell they are." I hadn't expected a straightforward answer as to the origins of the testicles, and I hadn't received one. No matter. I'd like to offer you $100,000 cash in exchange for these 2 items. My offer had an obvious effect on the young man, and a measure of focus and vitality appeared to come over him for the first time since I'd been there. This was clouded over quickly with a look of suspicion. 100K? For these balls? What the fuck are they, OP? I told him the truth. I don't know. They clearly possess a power of sorts, unlike anything I've ever experienced, and that power makes them valuable. Frankly, they're worth considerably more on the market than what I'm offering, but in order to collect on their true value, you need to know where to find that market, and I suspect that you don't. Flint considered briefly before coming back with his own truth. I just want them out of my life. They're awful. Yes, I accept your offer. Wonderful. I'll just need to run down to my car. I'll come straight back with a contract and your money. No problem, said Flint. He looked genuinely relieved now, as though his nerves had unwound several degrees. Even his hair seemed to settle down a touch. I exited the apartment, walked down the stairs, and pushed open the door to the apartment complex, stepping into the cool Vermont spring. As I made for my car, I wondered again if I was being prudent. It's not too late to hop in and drive back across state lines, I reminded myself, shuddering at the recollection of the terrible power that I had experienced. But while I was frightened of that mysterious force, I was equally driven by a desire to know it, and so I opened my trunk and retrieved the contract and a satchel of money. My decision had been made, and as I tread back up the stairs of the apartment complex, I kept at bay the awful premonition of doom that was tickling the back of my skull. You're professional, I reminded myself, wiping my brow with the back of my hand. It was wet with sweat despite the chill in the air. Before I was aware of it, I found myself again knocking on the door to Flint's apartment. OP? Came his voice from the other side. Wasn't sure you'd be back. Come on in, buddy. It's open. I shifted the documents to the hand carrying the satchel, turned the knob, and swung the door open. I couldn't see Flint anywhere, so I took a step in and called his name. I heard the door creak closed, and turned just in time to see that Flint had been standing behind it, and was now swinging a fist at me. I heard a crack a split second before the nerves in my face delivered the pain message to my brain, and then my head snapped back from the impact. I didn't have a chance to recover my footing, as Flint threw another punch into my nose. I toppled over backwards, the satchel flying out of my hand on the way down. I began to scream for help, but my opponent cut my scream short by landing a blow direct to my windpipe. Then I was on the ground, and he was on top of me, pummeling me with both fists. I saw mostly shocks of color, blotting out reality, but at some point I noticed that he was clenching a testicle in each hand. "They're mine!" he screeched, as he smashed against the side of my head. My ears began to ring, but I could hear him still yelling with maniacal fervor, "Mine! Mine! Mine!" I was thrown into a chaotic death panic, as a flood of various painful sensations assaulted me. Through some kind of instinct, I reached into my pocket and found the knife there. As I felt life slipping away from me, I pulled the knife out, flipped the blade open, and plunged it into Flint's side. I saw him grimace, but he kept beating me with full vigor. I stabbed him again, and then one more time. And then I was out. When I opened my eyes, it was with the utmost pain, as I was gazing blurrily up at the ceiling. My mind was blank for a moment, but for the acknowledgement that I was in agony all over. Next came the memory of Flint assaulting me. In a terrifying flash, he didn't kill me. But did I kill him? I noticed that I was lying on a bed. I propped myself up on an elbow, groaning at the effort. I was in a bedroom, strewn with dirty laundry and half-empty dishes. Then I heard approaching footsteps, and I hurriedly reached into my pocket, but my knife wasn't there. "You're up," said Flint, stepping into the doorframe, holding my blade in one hand. He had apparently taken off his shirt, cut it into strips, and wrapped it around his wounds. A red blotch in the fabric indicated the general area in which I had stabbed him. "Listen, man, this is a fucked up situation we're in here. You have to know that it wasn't me that flipped out on you, right? It was the balls. I wanted one more look at them before I sold them, you know, so I went over and picked them up, and then that's why I did it. You know that, right?" My brain wasn't at full or even a quarter capacity, but I believed him. If he'd meant to kill me, he could have killed me, instead of bringing me to his bed. My throat indicated that I was still too sore to produce words, so I simply nodded. "Good," said Flint. "Good. You stabbed me. I don't know how many times, but Man, I didn't even really feel it at first. I just went right on beating her ass, but it got to me eventually, and so I dropped the goddamn balls and grabbed my side, and as soon as I did, I was back to normal. You see? I nodded. It was the balls. I nodded again. So, what do we do now? I mean, I don't blame you for stabbing me. I was straight beating your ass to death. I don't blame you for that at all. And you can't blame me for beating your ass because it was the balls. And you know, there's all that money there in the living room. I could have taken that and run, but I didn't. Do you see? I nodded. So the best thing to do, I figure, is you take your money and go home, and I keep these goddamn balls from hell, and we pretend this whole thing never happened, right? Unless you want to help me destroy these things. I shook my head. Fine, fair enough, dude, fair enough. Just take your money and go then. I shook my head again. What? What then? I pointed to myself, reached into my pocket, and pretended to bring something out. I opened an invisible wallet and pulled out an invisible stack of money. I waved the pretend money in Flint's direction. I then pointed at him, and then at his groin. Finally, I pointed to myself again. Wait. You still want to buy these things? I nodded. 2 hours later, after a shower, a pot of coffee, a few painkillers, and an exchange of goods sanctified by the signing of a contract, I was driving back home, a bit unsteadily to be sure, with a jelly jar containing 2 severed and mysterious testicles in the passenger seat beside me. I suppose that, without further explanation, few will understand why I purchased the testicles, despite knowing the danger lurking within them. Some will think that the testicles compelled me, but this wasn't so. I made my ultimate decision without their influence. Others will think that I was insane, or perhaps simply foolish. That may well be the case, but I did have my reasons. Or if not reasons exactly, then let's call it intuition. While it was always possible that the power of the testicles was merely to make their possessors extremely aggressive in a bid for self-preservation, in my experience, objects of unknown qualities always contained depths beyond what was apparent at first glance. I therefore placed a bet on the possibilities that the testicles contained untold powers that had not yet been seen. Admittedly, I was indifferent at the time as to whether these powers would be destructive or not. To learn more about my purchase, I began research on 2 fronts. First, I dredged up everything that I could find about Flint's father, hoping to discover the origins of the mysterious artifacts. This path led to little new information. It was just as Flint had described. His father had been a lobbyist for major oil firms. I was able to extract a few names, major players in the Saudi Arabian government, as it turned out, to look at in more depth, but inevitably ran into impenetrable firewalls that left me dead-ended. Still, I kept those lines of research open, including keeping tabs on Flint, in case there was anything to be gleaned there. The other avenue that I took was first-hand experimentation. This was more fruitful than I could have hoped for, and allowed me a glimpse of the incredible potential contained within the testicles. In my study, there's a bookcase that, with the proper movement of mechanisms, swings open to reveal a hidden room. This is my meditation room. There's no real need for it to be hidden, other than some esoteric feeling that it grants me of being beyond the mundane world. It was here that I began my exploration of the testicles in earnest. I took them, still in the jelly jar, into my meditation room, and sealed the door behind me. There I sat cross-legged on my rug in the darkness, and unscrewed the lid of the jar. I plucked out the mysterious items, held one in each hand, and closed my eyes. At once I felt a surge of power run through my limbs, as though I were preparing for a fight. My eyes were shut, but my other senses were suddenly at extra human attention. I could hear the hum of my kitchen refrigerator, which was downstairs, all the way in the opposite corner of my house. I could smell what was inside it as well, as long as I focused for a moment to separate out the odors. My flesh detected every draft in the house, and I could picture their origins clearly in my mind, as though looking at a map. It took all of my will to stay seated. My body was urging me to stand up and move around, perhaps to search for some hidden intruder that my heightened senses had overlooked. In fact, I did stand up many times. It took several sessions before I was able to finally remain still. For a long time, nothing else happened. I repeated the ritual each evening after my other work was completed. I determined that there was more to the testicles than my mundane senses could detect. I sat for hours on end, growing stiff and sore, battling as best I could against the agitation urging me to mobilize bodily against some imaginary threat that might be lurking out there. One night, I was rewarded for my efforts. I began to see an image in my mind. It was of a yellow, flickering light, and as the image focused, it appeared to be the mouth of a cave, viewed at an angle, with a blazing fire inside. All around the entrance to this cave was a vast, endless darkness. I felt myself to be there, in body, and took a step closer, eager and apprehensive in equal measure to see what, if anything, was lurking within. As soon as I did so, the image was gone completely, and I was left with nothing but the inside of my eyelids and the humming of the refrigerator somewhere below me. I was able to get a little closer to the cave the next evening, and a little closer the evening after that. With each step, my sense of wonder had increased, but so too did my sense of dread. There was something unimaginably powerful inside that cave. I understood that in my cells, perhaps somewhere even deeper than that, and it both thrilled me and terrified me. The further I got in my meditations, the more my body paid the price. What seemed like a few minutes in my trance state was actually hours in the physical world. I would often find myself, in the morning at first, and in the afternoon as I progressed, still sitting there in my secret room, now soiled and weak with hunger. It got to the point where I was neglecting too many of my other responsibilities, so I was forced to take a couple of days off from my routine. Those days were painful, as if withdrawing from a drug. I was indeed shaking uncontrollably on the first day absent the testicles and running a high fever. By afternoon, I was vomiting blood. I hoped that I wouldn't lose my progress and need to start all over again, but also felt that I couldn't keep going without refreshing my body and my connection to the mundane world. On the third day without meditation, I decided to check up on Flint, something that I hadn't done for a week. If I couldn't pursue knowledge of the testicles directly, I supposed that I could still make progress on other fronts. Flint, I quickly discovered through a cursory search, had been brutally murdered in his apartment on the previous day by an unknown assailant, or possibly multiple assailants. After following up with some contacts, I was able to learn the details of his demise. He had been found dead, tied to a chair in his living room. His face had been brutally beaten. All 10 of his fingers had been cut off, and they were left in a puddle of various bodily fluids that had gathered at his feet. Perhaps worst of all, his disembodied testicles had found their way to rest in the graveyard of his digits. This discovery led me to a renewed volley of vomit, without ceremony. After my stomach had settled a spell, the implications hit me more fully. Somebody was after the testicles, the sale of which Flint had documentation of, with my name on it. That meant that it would not be long before they would be coming after me. I deal in artifacts that are often beyond the measure of money, and so I've invested a great deal in the top-of-the-line security system. I spent the rest of that day in contact with the company that serviced the system, ordering an inspection to ensure that everything was working properly, as well as a detail of workers to watch my house for a few days with their own eyes. Still, I did not feel safe. After analyzing it 1,000 ways, the inescapable conclusion was that whoever had tortured and slaughtered Flint had not only known about the existence of the testicles, but had very likely known much more about the properties and origins of them than I did. Why else would someone take such extreme measures to acquire them? I was at a distinct disadvantage, despite my elaborate security measures. In my experience, knowledge truly was a weapon, and I had nearly none of it, while my opponent apparently had it in spades. There was, however, one circumstance that I supposed might level the playing field a little bit, namely that I had possession of the testicles, and might be able to employ them in my defense, if only I knew their secrets a little more. Thus, I found myself returning to my meditation chamber that evening, despite the knowledge that my body was not yet adequate for the mission of delving deeper into the testicles. I needed several more days of rest, I knew, and I knew that my opponent would not afford me those days. I had to act post-haste, and place all of my bodily resources on the hope that I would be able to accomplish in one evening what I had not been able to achieve in the previous weeks leading up to this crisis. Liquor blunts focus, but lends courage, and of the two qualities, both of which were requisite to the task in front of me, I was far more deficient in the latter, and so, before unlocking my secret room, I fortified myself with a tumbler of very fine, unique liquor, distilled with water from polar ice, that an appreciative client had once gifted me. So emboldened, I entered my room and withdrew the testicles from their jar. Far from leaving me out of practice as I had feared, my respite had made me much more receptive to the power of the testicles. Nearly as soon as I closed my eyes, I found myself a few short steps from the entrance of the cave. I could feel the heat from the fire within, although I still couldn't see what was inside. A voice issued from the cave, and resounded without recognizable timbre in the center of my mind.
"Come. It is time."
I felt at last prepared to meet the mystery, as terrible as it might be, head on. But as I took a step forward into this otherworldly place, my senses detected something alarming happening in the ordinary world. There were intruders on my property. I had heard them creep upon the parked cars of the security detail, lure the guards out, and slit their throats in the night. There were 4 of them, I discerned, and they were nearly silent, but not silent enough to evade my senses. "Focus," commanded the entity inside the cave.
"Come."
My body tensed as the intruders began picking the lock of my front door. After a moment, I heard the click of the lock coming undone, and the beep of the control panel, indicating that the intruders had 45 seconds to enter the security code.
"Focus. Come."
I took another step towards the cave. I was now technically inside of it, with the entity lurking just around a slight bend. The intruders below me didn't bother with the control panel. They were apparently unconcerned with the police, likely figuring that they would be in and out before anybody arrived, or worse, that they could dispatch any officers in the same way that they had eliminated the private security guards.
"Focus. Come."
It was no easy matter. Every fiber of my being was screaming to mobilize against the real-world threat that was now creeping through my living room, towards my staircase. Soon enough, I realized with terror that the thudding of my pulse would grow so thunderous as to drown out even my supernatural sense of hearing, and I would lose track of my opponents, and be at an even greater disadvantage. But this proved to be a foolish worry, as the house alarm began to blare, drowning out all other sounds.
"Focus. Come."
In the cave, the force of gravity, it seemed, had grown 100-fold, and it felt like moving through something solid, but I forced myself onward, around the bend, until I saw the mysterious entity, standing as tall as me. It was a quivering, flaming, erect penis. What are you?"
"There is God, and there is God that made him. Then there's me, who made the first God. What you see is not my true form, which would melt your brain into a puddle."
I fell to my knees, weeping. I did not doubt that the entity's true form was beyond my ability to comprehend. The form that was before me stretched my mind to its limits, assaulting it with both a beauty and an ugliness that I hadn't thought possible, nor can I adequately describe. Are these yours?" I asked, holding the testicles up.
"Everything is mine. In particular, those balls are the only remaining relics from the 4th era on the 3rd Earth, and were once hung between the legs of the leader of the 2nd Humanity. Ah, what a violent disaster that experiment was. It was wonderful. You lot are awful, but nowhere near as delightfully terrible as 2nd Humanity. Just one of them could have, and would have gladly wiped out your entire species if you had looked at them funny. I gave them the sacred flame, and, predictably, they eventually used it to destroy the 3rd Earth completely."
Back in the physical world, above the ringing alarm, I could hear the clatter of books falling from my bookshelf. Somehow the intruders knew exactly where I was.
"If you don't wield the sacred flame yourself, quickly now, I'm afraid that it will fall into the hands of your house guests, who are very educated and very evil men."
Who are they?"
They're the ones who are going to kill you in about 30 seconds, unless you act now.
What do I do?
Summon the flame.
How?
You know how. Just picture it in your mind.
And with that, the divine entity in the guise of an enormous penis vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. No, not alone. A sliver of light crept into my chamber as the intruders began to open my secret door. My body was too weak and exhausted to move. I watched helplessly as they entered, one by one, dressed in black robes, wearing ancient-style grotesque masks. One of them leveled a crossbow at the center of my forehead and released an arrow. I clenched down on the testicles and prepared to die. The arrow, I thought, is right now being burned out of existence by the sacred flame. It doesn't exist, and it has never existed. It has been reduced to less than ash. And then it happened. The arrow burst into flame when its tip was only an inch from my skull, and it disappeared into nothingness. 3 of my assailants turned to run out of the room, while the 4th aimed a gun at my head. I lit them all on fire at the same time, and then they were gone. And with them went the sound of the blaring alarm, because they had never existed, and so they had never set it off. My strength drained entirely. I crumpled to the floor in a catatonic state, not quite asleep, but certainly not awake. It's been a week since I discovered the true power of the testicles, and I have not touched them since. They sit in a jar on a table next to the bed where I've been recovering ever since. The young man, Flint, who sold the artifacts to me, is alive, if not well. His killers never existed, and so, quite simply, they never killed him. I phoned him yesterday, and he sounded deep in his cups, and not in a good place mentally. But he is alive, and I intend to provide him whatever help I can, seeing as we share a bond over the testicles. I have, in fact, offered him a position as my assistant, and he is currently considering my offer. Meanwhile, I've decided not to put the testicles up for sale. They're too powerful. I am deeply uncomfortable having them around, but it seems as though the role of their guardian has fallen squarely on my shoulders. I have no doubt that others will come for them. I will not hesitate to erase these would-be thieves with the sacred flame. Other than that, I'm attempting to move on with my life. My algorithm has just alerted me of something potentially interesting. There's no rest for the curious, and that's how it ought to be. Yours, OP. Well, that is a wild ride if I ever took one. It was injected, obviously, with a little bit of humor, a little bit of seriousness, mystery, intrigue. I really like this. I'm super curious to see what other things Oliver might discover on his journey. It feels to me like every one-off story that I read, I'm like, this should be a series, but damn it, this should be a series as well. So if it turns into one, I'll gladly share some more with you guys. Thank you, as always, for listening, friends. I hope that you will like, comment, and or subscribe if you did enjoy this episode. Go ahead and share it around as well if you would like to. Although, maybe not to your grandmother, because, you know, she probably doesn't want to know about OP's testicles. Or maybe she does, if she's the curious sort. Anyways, friends, thank you, as always, for listening along with me. I hope to see you in the next one. I will be back tomorrow with another NoSleep creepypasta. So I hope that you'll join me for it. Keep yourselves safe out there, and I'll catch you in the next one. Until then, friends, bye-bye.